says that she loves me. Isn't it lovely when the one you're lusting is the one you're loving?
But he be out there commenting frequently on the Roland Martin show, and now he's here today. He's been here, I feel like you've been part of this family a long time, back in the day. Let me welcome back to the show, Dr. Omekongo Dibinga. Welcome to the Karen Epps Show. Hi. You are muted. You're muted.
I'm unmuted. So happy to be back on the show, Karen. It's been a while, and I just appreciate all you do. And being from Boston, I definitely appreciate the story you shared. The average net worth for a white family is $247,000. For Black families, it's $8 in Boston. So, yeah.
I didn't know you were from. I know you guys have a big room studio in Boston. I didn't know that was why that you actually had a connection, which is great. We were just talking about businesses and franchises and why it's important, for us in particular, because in our community, other people are getting wealthy, and that's fine, but we are not. Our dollar is not circulating. And to the point you just raised, $8 versus $200,000 plus dollars wealth. That wealth gap is stunning, and it's generational.
That's right. That's right. And it's growing, daily in Boston. And Michelle Wu, who's been the mayor since 2021, talks about this actively. And, even in my book, when I'm talking about Black economics in one of my chapters, this is a real issue. And so I'm very happy to see. And Jaylen Brown has already been doing, a lot of the work in Boston before this contract. And so that's why many of us in the hoods, in Boston, in Roxbury, Dorchester, Mattapan, we're excited because he's not just talking about it on many levels. He's already been about it. So we're looking forward to seeing even more.
You mentioned the lies about Black people, which is doing well. You're getting a lot of great reviews. It is, climbing the charts. The impetus to do this book with a foreword by Michael Eric Dyson, how did this, come about?
Well, first of all, in terms of just, publishing, as an avid listener of your show, you're always pushing us, to do our best and to do more, not just talk about it, be about it. And you're always talking about your publishing background. And I published other books, but I decided that I wanted to go with a mainstream publisher instead of self-publishing. So I went through that process. So that was kind of the technical thing. But the reason why I wrote the book was because there were so many people, especially people in the white suburban areas, coming out of the Black Lives Matter, movements and things that were happening in 2020 and 2021, who were looking for more. They wanted to go to a deeper level, go beyond the chants. They still wanted to do the work. So I wanted to write something that could arm them with more information in their fight. But here's the thing, Karen, when I started asking people about this book and what the chapters should be, I got more stories about lies that Black people were told from Black people and that hampered their existence and their lives. And so this book became a book for anybody looking to challenge the lies about Black people that not only hampered them as Black people, but maybe hampered how other people looked at Black people.
Okay, what's the biggest lie that we tell ourselves and each other about Black people?
The biggest lie that we tell ourselves is that we're not worthy of collaboration. And that has been beaten out of us. We've been bought into the seasoning that took place during slavery when they brought us to the West Indies and beat our culture out before they brought us here. This idea that we cannot work together, that we're always going to tear each other down. Everything that you all been talking about in your last segment on franchising and this idea of trust and even how you started the show. So that has led to a certain level of climate of self-hate. I talk in the book about a restaurant in Boston called Yours Takeout, which was owned by the Nation of Islam. And there was a brother in there from the mosque, and he heard a Black person complaining about the food, and he said, what's ridiculous? McDonald's you could find a roach in your food at McDonald's tomorrow and you're still going to support that store, but a Black store messes up one time and you're never coming back. And, those types of stories play into our head where we feel like we got to be the best, be the only Black person in the room. Some of us get on some Clarence Thomas level stuff where we get to the top of the ladder and kick it down so that nobody else can get there. And then many of us buy into the lies that we're not smart. I interview people on their anti-racist journey. And one of them, Dr. Michael Robinson, he says, being the first to go to college, so many people in his family bought into the stereotypes that they didn't even try to take themselves to that next level. So those are some of the challenges that we have. But the biggest one is that one that we just can't work together.
I debunk that on a regular, but I do also see how I have to fight through anti-Blackness and Black people, which is why I seek out people who are not infected by it. It's like I'm attracted to people. I'm wildly attracted to people who are not infected by anti-blackness, because it's a lot of work. And for some of you, to eradicate that, some of you are leaning into Urban View to get some of that, but it's work we have to do, and we have to first acknowledge, right? Like any disease, you have to acknowledge that you have it, right? You got to first acknowledge we are sick. And all of us, because it's baked into the soil of America. America can only exist if it denigrated people coming from Africa. You can't justify putting people through the torture, the torment, the rape, the pillage of a human, the decimation of character of a whole entire group of people, unless you have deemed those people to be inferior, and that you did that generation after generation after generation. So it's even hard to kind of blame folk for their ignorance, right? Because it is baked into the schools, is baked into the history, is baked into everything, that somehow there's something inherently wrong with Black people. Even in Florida, talking about they benefited, enslaved people benefited, as if they weren't brought here with the skills to build this country. That should be the narrative. And we can't just fight back with cheeky comments on social media.
That's right.
We have to attack it at the source, which is through the education system, through these textbooks, but also through these institutions that are built inherently with the bias built in. And we also are subject to the bias. So we have to acknowledge that, probably more so, right? Because none of this could exist if we didn't also believe it.
Oh, absolutely. And I do my work, I travel across the country working in schools, public schools, private schools, charter schools, seeing the same things. I go and speak in corporations, seeing the same thing. These fundamental beliefs about lies about Black people, even going back to what you were talking about earlier with the salary disparities and how, Black women have to deal with a lot more just coming into the door, is based on those lies. And so the goal of the book is to challenge that in every single way. We're talking about, you just mentioned Ron DeSantis, we're talking about the fake activism surrounding critical race theory and how that's problematic. We're talking about Black people and issues relating to banking and the lies told about that, about swimming, about criminalization, about real estate and ownership, and how every single challenge we've had in this country, of course, you talk about personal responsibility every single day, but you also acknowledge the root causes of it. And so people, if you don't acknowledge the root causes of it, you just look at it, people, and think that's just who they are. That's just what they believe. That's just all they can do. Like Malcolm X said, if you believe you never did anything, you're going to believe you can never do anything. Even in the chapter I have on I Don't Feel Your Pain, talking about Black women, dying 3 times the rate of white women because of this belief that Black people can experience more pain, which is also at the heart of the Veterans Affairs story about Black veterans getting denied more coverage than white veterans. It's everywhere.
We're talking with Dr. Dibinga. You're at American U. You teach diversity, and there's an assault on diversity and inclusion. And let me just fully disclose, I feel like for many companies, they only added that in the summer of George Floyd to, it's sort of like during 9/11, when folk who might have been, Middle Eastern, from Northern Africa, from certain cultures, maybe Muslim, put an American flag in their businesses. So that, it's almost like a Passover. I feel like diversity and inclusion became like Passover for a lot of companies. They weren't committed to it because they didn't need the summer of George Floyd to say, I need more people in my company to make my company better, because of the exchange of ideas will make us even richer. We won't ever have to worry about if we have blind spots when we hire people with a particular purpose. For your business, how has that dried up? This business of diversity and inclusion.
Yeah, and my last 5 chapters of the book are all about solutions. And one of them is solutions in these corporate spaces. And I actually started to experience things before the pandemic, because when Trump was in office, he came in with his executive order. So about no DEI trainings and the like. So organizations that I was working with before 2016, they're like, well, can you kind of do it this way now, or not say this or not say that? So that was pre that. So then, yes, COVID, I would say 2020, 2021, things picked up dramatically. But then that whole diversity fatigue started to kick kick in. People started to get out more. The mentality of there was already the fatigue. Dr. King talks about this. Even our white liberals can be, just as bad because they kind of look at Black equality on an installment plan. So, they kind of only want to go so far, and then they feel like they've done enough. So I saw some of that. And then all of this critical race theory, all of this other stuff came in and made a lot of it worse. So in many areas, a lot of us who do this work, it has dried up. You may see that companies, and I know you know this, companies may be hiring more DEI people, but they're hiring younger ones who are in like their 20s and like fresh out of college who have no knowledge. So they have no budgets. And so they're just there in face only. So we're also seeing some of that as well. And it's a real challenge for us who believe in this work. And that's why I wrote the book, to kind of help arm us who are still doing this fight and not giving up. We know that it's not supposed to be cyclical. This is supposed to be a life choice for America.
We're talking with Dr. Omekongo Dibinga. The book is called Lies About Black People: How to Combat Racist Stereotypes and Why It Matters. For you doing research or whatever, did you get surprised? Because I know you've been studying this for a while. Was there something, was there a lie that came about that you didn't even know?
Well, most of the things, I came across, I had a strong idea of, but the one thing that really threw me off was the story of Linda Taylor. That was the woman that everyone has come to know affectionately as the welfare queen. That was the woman, who Ronald Reagan talked about, didn't mention by name, about this woman who was bilking the welfare system. And so in my chapter about Black people aren't good with money, I dig more deeply into her story. And her story is really one of not how much about how she cheated the welfare system, but how America cheated her. This was a woman who had credible evidence that she actually killed people, but like one of her roommates, but they spent more money on this trial to try to convict her than they did on that. This was somebody who was a mixed woman. She endured a great deal of abuse. She dealt with mental illness, so many different types of challenges, but rather than help her, they made her a scapegoat. And then in doing research more about her, I found out more about how this country's history has always been there in terms of the rich exploiting welfare systems more than any other group, which tied directly, I do in the book, to the COVID situation and how people like Jared Kushner and Kayleigh McEnany and all of these other people were getting more money in PPP loans, Tom Brady, than the people who actually needed it. And so I tracked that system as well. And so learning more about the story of Linda Taylor and other people we have stereotyped was one of the things that really hit me, the ability to personalize these stories, as well as the Myers family that worked to integrate Levittown coming out of after World War II. They were martyrs in the field of real estate, even though they weren't physically killed, but the things that they went through as well was very surprising. And then the things I learned about swimming and the history of swimming and country clubs in Washington, D.C., those were the top three things that surprised me.
And we're looking at this summer, kids being demonized for breaking into pools, and it's hot as hell out there, and pools are shutting down in our neighborhoods, and our children drown, I think 3 or 4 times the rate of other children because of inherent bias around swimming pools and beaches. Whole oceans have and lakes segregated. How do you segregate the water? But they did, and also stoned a child to death for crossing an imaginary line so many years ago. But it is stunning to me that we can live in a world with so little compassion. And as it relates to Linda Taylor, she even identified as white because she, was white on her birth certificate. So even holding her up. But then when you think welfare, when the majority of people on welfare in this country don't have melanin, we don't talk about that. We don't talk about that. The majority of people in this country on welfare are not Black. That's right. We don't talk about that. So welfare queen became a proxy for Black women taking advantage of the system. And even to this day, you got poor people in Kentucky and other places that they don't want government handouts when they need it. The government's there. You pay taxes. You need your teeth. You need to have health care. You're going to reject Obamacare because it's got Obama's name on it when you need your diabetes medicine? Are you kidding me? This is so sick that they got people voting and moving against their own interests over melanin that no one can control.
That's right.
Crazy.
Right.
Are you optimistic, Dr. Dibinga?
I am optimistic. And one of the things that makes me optimistic, in the book, I have activities that people can do at the end of every chapter, but I also interview a multi-generational, multiracial group of people in the book who are sharing their anti-racist journey. And these are people who are not, many of them are not activists. They're just out there living their lives. And when I see what they're talking about and how they feel about the future, that makes me optimistic. When I go to these schools, when I go to and talk to young people, that makes me optimistic. Being up, you know how it is being a professor and seeing, the optimism in the eyes of many of our young people, that gives me hope. So yeah, it gives me hope. And the Urban View family gives me hope. Listening to all the shows, seeing what you all do and the movement and the people that you all have just saved on so many levels. I know y'all are so humble with it, but y'all are really saving lives economically, socially, professionally. So when I surround myself with this and what y'all are doing, I have a whole chapter in here on our racial vocabulary and how we define ourselves, BIPOC and all of that. And that came from you constantly talking about things relating to, the global majority and how we have to change our language to embrace our power. So I talk about that in the book as well. So when we surround ourselves with people like the Urban View family, we have no choice but to be optimistic.
As she smiles and says that she loves me. Isn't it lovely when the one you're lusting is the one